it over to you, Rabbi, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I think Stan's coming on as well. I think.
Yes.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch haba. Welcome.
Hi, Rabbi. Welcome back.
Thank you. Okay, Baruch Hashem. I guess we'll get started. Here we are. Welcome to the second class of our Kashrut and healthy eating class. So the diet for the soul and diet for the body, as we say. And today we're going to do a deep dive into shechita and to a ritual slaughter and get to know that a little bit, the ins and outs of it. And then we're going to talk about my favorite topic, animal proteins. And we'll see how that affects our health and what that does. And you can make your decision from there. Okay, so what is shechita? That's the first question we're going to ask this evening. And shechita, as you know, in the general sense, is the Jewish religious and humane method of slaughtering that is permitted animals and poultry for food. Okay, it's really the only method of producing kosher meat and poultry that is allowed by halacha, and according to our understanding, it is the most humane method, and we're going to explain that in more depth as we go on this evening. So, interestingly enough, there's no actual ritual involved in shechita. It is, however, one of the main principles of our faith, that the laws halachot shechita were given halacha Moshe Sinai. They were divinely given to Moshe Rabbeinu on Mount Sinai, as we learned in the Sefer Devarim, in the book of Devarim, in chapter 12, verse 21. So all the rules, the halachot that govern shechita, they're codified, they're also defined, and they're binding, and they're as valued today as they were as ever. And they also ensure a swift and a painless, end, or what they call dispatch. That's the official term for the end of life of the animal, the dispatch of the animal. So anytime there's an infringement on the laws of shechita, that really renders the meat unconditionally forbidden as food for us, for Jewish people. Okay, so this practice, this time-tested and time-hallowed practice of shechita is marked, first of all, by its compassion and consideration for the welfare of the animal. We'll talk about that. And it is really one of the central pillars that sustain Jewish communities throughout thousands of years. I think it's when it comes to shechita, we really understand this idea of you are what you eat, not just on a physical sense, but if it is on a physical sense, that people understand the idea of you are what you eat, which is a very popular, idiom in our day and age. Nonetheless, on a spiritual level, it's even more important. And so everything that involves shechita comes with a lot of precise accuracy and precision, to the extent, and not only that, also the shochet themselves, which we'll get into a little bit, has to be of the most upstanding character and yirat shamayim and reverence and fear and reverence of Hashem to accomplish this, such that when there are issues, I touched upon this last week a little bit. If there are issues, a person faces issues of faith and fear and emunah and belief in Hashem, those issues might also be affected by an influence of improperly slaughtered meat that may be affecting the heart, may be affecting the soul and neshama of a person, and it manifests symptomatically as a lack of faith or lack of emunah. So we see this combination of spiritual and physical coming together in an interface with the food that we eat, in particular with meat and its ritual slaughter. So, of course, shechita is performed by a highly trained shochet. We're going to talk about that. And the procedure really consists of a very rapid and expert sort of transverse cut or incision with basically an instrument that is surgically sharp called the chalaf. And it basically severs the major structures and vessels of the neck of the animal. So what does this do? And I'm going to say this many times to the class. We really get this, I really internalize this. Hold on, why am I muted? Okay, am I okay? Okay, great. So, this really quick and transverse incision causes a rapid drop in blood pressure, a very rapid drop in blood pressure in the brain, and immediately basically causes an irreversible cessation of consciousness. That's what happens when it's done in the best way possible. And so what happens at that point in time is shechita renders the animal completely insensible to pain and ends the life of the animal. and the animal basically what's called exsanguinates. Blood comes out in a very swift action, and that basically fulfills all the requirements of humaneness and compassion as well. It also provides the closest connection between a human being and an animal on this level. It's important to note that since 1928, actually, the whole process of shechita is protected by various enactments in legislations and governments, both in England, in the European Convention for Protection of Human Rights, Fundamental Freedoms. It's also in British law, also in the United States and Canada as well. The humaneness of shechita is acknowledged in what's called the Humane Methods of Animal Slaughter legislation. However, there have been, up to even recent times, and up to last summer actually, many, hi Mary, there have been quite a few detractors in the government themselves on the level of, at the federal level even, that have tried to completely almost shut down ritual slaughter in Canada altogether. And I'll get into that as we go through that this evening. And Baruch Hashem, thanks to, I guess, a lot of efforts and a lot of unity between a lot of the major kosher agencies in Canada, MK and COR in particular, they've really been able to sort of stop that potential governmental ban on kosher slaughter. Okay, so why do Jews practice shechita? Next question of the evening. Okay, so Jewish law halacha states that if meat is to be eaten, then we're required to basically to slaughter or dispatch the animal by shechita, which is this very precise prescribed method of slaughter. Okay, and it is the only method permitted by halacha. There are no other methods. It's important to note the connection between the welfare of animals and halacha. Jewish law requires that animals be treated with consideration and kindness and respect. And the Torah, basically, if you really think about it, is the first systematic legislation that prohibits cruelty to animals and mandates their humane treatment. Let me give you some examples today. And these laws are just as binding today as they were in the past. So, for example, the Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us that it's prohibited to cause pain to animals. That's called Sa'ar Ba'alei Chaim. Okay? The Sefer Devarim tells us very, very clearly a person is required to feed their animals before themselves. And we say that every day, twice a day in the Shema Yisrael. We have to feed our animals before ourselves. In the book of Shemot, Exodus, and Devarim and Deuteronomy, animals are to rest on Shabbat, since work is forbidden. Okay. Another in Bereshit, the sort of verse chapter 9, Perek Tet. Well, I think we just read it. It's prohibited to sever the limb from a live animal and eat it while the animal is still alive. Another point. Devarim, one is obligated to relieve an animal's suffering, of an obligation to do that. Okay. In Devarim also, an animal that is threshing grains or corn, it must not be muzzled, because they're going to eat. It's cruelty to not let them have a little bit while they're threshing. And finally, in Devarim also, an ox and a donkey, two different species of animals, must not be harnessed together to do work. Okay, so we see from a lot of these injunctions in the Tanakh, in the Torah, there flows numerous halachot for animal care and the relief of animal suffering. And of course, all blood sports have always been forbidden to Jews. Okay, the whole idea of hunting and things like that. Okay, when it's not for the sake of food, and even when it's not for the sake of food, we have to catch the animal and then slaughter it properly. So that's a whole to do. Now, halakha, our Jewish teaching, does permit the taking of an animal's life in order to fulfill the human need for food. And we said this is only done through shechita. Okay, so really the shechet is always aware that it's his responsibility to perform shechita only as done by halakha, by Jewish law. Okay, next. So we talked about this idea of the link between the treatment of animals and the treatment of human beings. A person, and I know Meyer said this once before, I've heard it a few times in visiting, that if I see someone's good with my dogs, I know they're good with people. That's the general. So we also that's a general principle which we really hold on to. That a person who's cruel to animals, unfortunately, is likely to be cruel to people as well. So that's why we see animal welfare to be a very important part of Jewish law and tradition. And not only that, that the personal conduct of the person who is who is charged with shechita or is chosen this path of doing shechita, it has to be of the highest religious observance, the highest morality and integrity, and that's part of their suitability to practice as a shochet. It's very, very important. Shochtim regularly are, using a mikveh every day to spiritually purify themselves. They're supposed to have a lot of Yirat Shamayim. You'll find most shochtim are, classically you'll see them, they're like, from Hasidic groups with beards and they're learned. And so there's a lot of in the ideal sense, a lot of that surrounding the idea that they have to be of highest moral stature. Okay. Any questions so far? Good. Okay. So how is shechita performed? So we said it's performed with a surgically sharp instrument called the chalaf, and it has to be perfectly smooth without even the minutest notch or irregularity. It has to constantly be checked as well and examined. All right. And that's where you get into a lot of different customs. You'll hear in the world of kosher meat, Lubavitch shchita, that shchita. So where certain groups are particular about checking the knife after every single slaughter, and some groups will say, no, you can do it after 4 or 5 or after 10 or whatever the case is. So that's where you might see those differences outlined. But ideally, it has to be checked constantly to ensure that it is maintained at its highest level of precision and sharpness. Okay, so the frontal structures of the neck, and we're talking about the trachea, that's the windpipe, talking about the esophagus, that's the food pipe. We're talking about the carotid arteries, where oxygenated blood flows, the jugular veins, where blood that has no oxygen is flowing now back to the heart. All of these are severed in a rapid and uninterrupted action that causes an instant drop in blood pressure in the brain. And that basically causes, like I said before, consciousness is gone, sensibility to pain is gone, and then the animal is basically dispatched and it starts to exsanguinate and all the blood comes out. Now, we're going to talk about this idea of more recent slaughter, in general, animal slaughter in the slaughter world, of what's called stunning. Stunning can be done in different ways, and we'll see what effect that has on the animal. And there were some proponents that thought that stunning, or proposed that stunning, is a more humane system of slaughter than shechita. And we'll get into that in a minute. So exsanguination happens afterwards when all the blood comes out of the carcass. And this is also very important. Why? Because in halakha, we as Jews are forbidden to consume blood. It's explicitly written in the book of Deuteronomy in Devarim, okay, chapter 12, you bet. All right, and so exsanguination, or the blood coming out, is necessary in all methods of animal slaughter, since the blood deteriorates quickly and it actually could putrefy the meat if it's retained in the animal. So I find it actually very ironic that we have this halakha that we as Jews are not permitted to consume blood. Yet throughout the ages, there was always what are called the blood libels, right? Using blood in baking of matzah and killing this and killing that and drinking blood, when it's clearly written that we're not allowed to have to consume blood on any level. Okay, so shechita essentially ensures you have this maximum let out of the blood. So now there are 5 halachic requirements that a shochet is obliged to ensure when they are performing shechita. And this is found in Shulchan Aruch, Yoreh De'ah. I should say that the laws for shechita, they're found. They start off in the Torah, go on into the Gemara, Masechet Chulin, in the Mishnah, in the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch, Yoreh De'ah, has 28 sections which are subdivided into 156 sub-regulations, only centering just on shechita. So that's how important and how intricate the laws and details are of shechita. So some of the 5 halachic requirements for a shochet. First one is there should be no interruption of the incision. That's called shehiyah. It has to be one rapid movement. There should be no interruption. Secondly, there should be no pressing of the surgical instrument of the chalaf against the neck. That's called derasa. So that's called basically pressing up against the neck. That also is not allowed, because the extension of that is we're not allowed to use a guillotine. Guillotine presses down, correct? So that's also prohibited. The chalaf, this special knife that's used, should not be covered by the hide of cattle or the wool of sheep or the feathers of birds. That's called chalada. So it has to be of adequate length. It has to be very, very long. next, the incision has to be at the appropriate site. So it severs the major structures and vessels of the neck. That's called the hagrama. And finally, there must be no tearing of the vessels before or during the process of shechita. So tearing could be if, let's say, if it's a serrated knife can cause tearing. So the knife has to be completely smooth and completely, I'd say like perfectly accurate and precise when it does the job. Now, can anyone perform shechita? There's a question for you. So anybody who's trained as a shochet, specially trained, can perform shechita. Men or women, if they're properly trained. We know that the grandmothers of old would be shechting chickens as well, and they'd be very versed in doing that, I should add. This requires actually a study of a number of years and examination. In days of old, it was a passed on tradition between mothers and daughters, where there was a practical learning done. Okay, both in theory and practice. All right, the laws of shechita for a shochet of big animals, they have to be well versed in anatomy and pathology as well. They also have an apprenticeship they have to go through with another experienced shochet to become fully qualified. And the position of a shochet is represented by a person who's God-fearing and has great integrity and is respected in the Jewish community. So you'll hear sort of family names like Reznik. I think that's a Russian for cutting, for example, or Shochet, Rabbi Shochet, for example. Originally, we're Shochtim. So a lot of those European names, that's where they come from, was a reflection of their professions. Okay, so are there any other methods besides slaughtering? And the quick answer is no. Shechita is the only method of animal slaughter that is permitted by Jewish law that enables a Jewish person to eat meat and poultry. Okay, it's not some sort of dispensable custom. It's not an outdated rite or ceremony. It's really a divinely ordained teaching given to us by Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. And it remains applicable today as well, as just as important, okay? Now, after shechita is performed, are there any inspections that occur? Yes. The shochet performs an inspection and examines the organs and the vessels immediately after the severing with the shechita incision. He asked to ascertain whether the shechita was properly performed. And so this is called a visual and tactile inspection called bedikat hasimanim. And it's an integral part of the shechita. It's required by halacha. The shochet also examines, and this is where the knowledge of internal anatomy and pathology comes in. They also examine the internal organs and the lungs, called bedikat hare'ah, or hare'ot. We talked about this and touched upon it last week. Checking the lungs for any lesions, checking whether there are any abnormalities or defects that disqualify the animal from being kosher. And this is direct practical application of the halacha of Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah. So let's go back and talk about stunning, for example. So what is stunning? Stunning refers to this method of attempting to render the animal or the bird unconscious prior to slaughter. Okay, so the main methods that are used in the general slaughtering industry for cattle and sheep are the following: what's called a captive bolt gun, and that is basically a steel bolt that is shot into the skull of the front of the animal's brain. Okay, or electric shock. Electrodes are clamped to the animal's head or heart, and the animal basically is electrocuted. So these methods are contrary to halacha. Why? Because an animal that's intended for food must be healthy and uninjured at the time of slaughter, of shechita. So all these stunning methods, the bolt gun, the electrocution, they injure the animal and they may cause it to be a trefa, a taref, non-kosher. And if the stunning kills the animal, it makes it into what's called a nevela, which is basically a carcass or an animal that has not been shechted, that has died. Okay, and both are forbidden as food for Jews to consume. So not only that, with these methods, there's also a delay between the stun and the actual cutting or slaughtering or sticking of the animal, and in that delay, the animal can regain consciousness, and that's been reported by PETA, by animal welfare groups. Okay, the stun that's affected by shechita, when the incision takes place, that's irreversible, and there really is no delay. So based on that, we understand and we conclude that shechita is humane and efficient. Now, apart from the prohibition halachically of using stunning, these methods, there actually is no conclusive evidence either that these methods actually render the animal insensible to pain. There is evidence that they are only paralyzed, and so they're prevented from displaying their pain. Not only that, sometimes when this bolt, captive bolt that's shot into the brain of the animal, when it fails, and it does, a significant percentage of cases, it does fail, it causes basically additional suffering to the animal and distress as well. And again, the conscious animal now is in acute pain, and the bolt gun is applied again, shot again into the animal, okay? Or the electric tongs are again applied to restun the animal. So shechita really avoids all of these problems of ineffective stunning, since really there's no mechanical or electrical appliance to be misapplied or to go wrong, okay? And that's where we understand that shechita really produces an effective and irreversible stun. Okay, so is there a health risk with stunning? A couple of research references here. So the British Ministry of Agriculture, Fishery and Food has shown that the use of captive bolt guns, stun guns on animals that are infected with yummy BSE, or it's called mad cow disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. So that they can transmit the infected tissue into parts of an animal used in the human food chain. That's all. That's been shown, and this also is a risk for humans to contracting this variant of what's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or the mad cow disease. Okay. Again, not only that, the infected tissue was also detected on the hands of operatives and on slaughter equipment. In the U.S., in a similar research called the Harvard study, the Department of Agriculture also concluded that stunning methods using penetrative bolt guns do carry a great risk to human health, since they can also transmit this agent of mad cow disease. Okay, and so the U.S. Food and Safety Inspection Service has amended the federal meat inspection regulations to prohibit the use of these types of captive bolt stunning devices. And thank God, shechita avoids these hazards since the brain is not damaged, and so it protects human health as well as animal welfare. Okay, so we come down to a really important question here: is shechita really humane? And I like to quote a lot of these experts here. So there actually is quite a bit of scientific opinion that concludes that shechita causes no suffering or pain. The guru of veterinary medicine in our modern time, Dr. Temple Grandin, I love to quote her. She's great. She is the associate professor of animal science at Colorado State University. So she conducted a series of experiments in 1994, and she set out to determine whether cattle feel the actual incision of shechita. So in one case, there was a device used to restrain an animal's head during shechita, and that device basically was deliberately applied very lightly, so lightly that during the incision it could pull away its head from the knife. That's how lightly they applied this restraint to the head. And so, of the 10 animals in the experiment, none of them reacted or even attempted to pull their heads away during the shechita, during the process of shechita. So that led Dr. Grandin to conclude, and I quote, "It appears the animal is not aware that its throat has been cut." Okay. There was a similar experiment that was conducted 2 years earlier on 20 bulls by Dr. Fleming Bajer, head of the Danish Veterinary Laboratory. And also, the research indicated that they do not react to shechita incision. And he quotes here, "The bulls were held in a comfortable head restraint with all body restraints released. They stood still during the cut and did not resist the head restraint." Professor Harold Burrow, one-time professor of veterinary medicine in London, Royal Veterinary College, he says, quote, "Having witnessed the Jewish method carried out on many thousands of animals, I am unable to persuade myself that there is any cruelty attached to it. As a lover of animals, an owner of cattle, and a veterinary surgeon, I would raise no objection to any animal bred, reared, or owned by me being subjected to this method of slaughter." And finally, Dr. Stuart Rosen, who's on the faculty of medicine at Imperial College, he writes in a recent paper, he wrote in 2004, called Physiological Insights into Shechita. He concludes, quote, Shechita is a painless and humane method of animal slaughter. So there you have it. As far as the humaneness of Shechita, we're good to go. Nonetheless, Rashi, the holy commentator from thousands of years ago, writes that as the laws of Kashrut are those laws that we said last week, ultimately are laws that God told us to observe, and we really don't have a real reason. Only over thousands of years we've seen connections to them. Since there is no real reason, the other nations of the world will always come along and try to dissuade us or prevent us or mock us for observing these halachot. And it couldn't be truer today. It happened in our backyard in Canada. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency had somehow put up some guidelines that they all of a sudden were requiring all sorts of cognitive tests on animals to ensure that they were irreversibly conscious before being processed. This insistence or these regulations that were established, that basically caused all sorts of conventional slaughter to come to a halt, because it just didn't make sense for a lot of these slaughterhouses, industrial slaughterhouses, not Jewish ones, that were using shochtim and ritual slaughterers for a lot of their meat. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't profitable for them to continue. So all of a sudden there was a drop in 5 years. It went from basically, I think it was 30 slaughterhouses to 17 to 5 to some really small amount. And finally, both the MK and the COR took the government to court. And Baruch Hashem, there was an injunction granted in July in the federal court that suspended these regulations and suspended the Canadian Food Inspection Agency from carrying out these regulations and ended basically that would have ended the practice of shechita in Canada. So we're lucky, Baruch Hashem, that at least we're still sort of active in making it sure. And the truth is, most of the meat that comes to Canada, kosher meat, does not come from Canada. It comes from outside of Canada at this point in time. Nonetheless, there was an observation that this was, not having this ability to be able to slaughter halachically and in the Jewish way in Canada would have prevented, us from continuing in our traditions, even though we may be bringing it out of the country. Not having the opportunity to do that would have been a problem. So Baruch Hashem, that's been stopped for now. Any questions?
I just wanted to ask when they would sacrifice an animal in the Beit HaMikdash, and then some of that would be eaten like by the Kohanim and so on. So how did that work? Like, would they would have to make a korban on an animal that was not slaughtered yet? So how did that? Did they slaughter the animal after they did the korban, or did they the other way around? Like, was the animal still alive when it went to the sacrifice?
Oh, no. The animal was slaughtered.
The animal was slaughtered first. So the shechita happened first.
Yes.
And then the korban is done, and then so the shechita that happened prior to the korban would happen exactly the same way as we do the shechita today.
Yes. The only exception would be a certain shechita of birds, which was done by Kohanim, who had again, this is and I don't know if it was for consumption, but it was a certain slaughtering that was done on the back of the neck of the bird with the thumbnail of the Kohen that was very sharp. And I don't think it wasn't for consumption. It was a certain shechita that was done for a certain korban of a bird. That's the only exception. Anything that was done for consumption was done in the way we understand shechita that was brought down from Moshe Rabbeinu from Har Sinai.
I have a comment.
Yes, please, Ron.
I find it interesting you're talking about the politics and all, and I find it interesting that there's so much support for a maid, medical assistance in death, but very little for raid, rabbinic assistance in death of animals. If it's humans, we're going to kill, no problem. We can, but if it's animals, then it's a big problem. Yeah. Just shows you where how people regard the different species.
Very much so, and you see the again, the ethics of communities and peoples and morals change over time, and we don't have to go too far. I think I think in this parasha of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, and their the way, you know, their policies and their practices type of thing. You know, you can see how things deteriorated over time. Now, also, you know, that your comment is very also appropriate. You know, in the way, for example, in the World War II, you know, German culture or was such that you know, there was more respect for animals than there was for human beings. You know, in particular.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what about the actual point about whether it's you know, because I mean, you know, vegetarians and so on, and we spoke about this last week about, you know, what satisfies a person to have meat on Shabbat and so on. But if it's not necessary, if it's possible to not have to kill an animal and you know, just eat vegetarian, isn't that I mean, it's preferable, right? It's preferable for the animal. You don't have to go through the animal doesn't have to die.
Stan, I love when you ask questions at the exact perfect time. That's what I want to say right now. And so that leads us into the next wonderful section of our talk this evening. And so, interestingly enough, and I'll answer it through what I'm going to say right now, your question. So we just a couple of weeks ago in Parshat Noah, we read after the flood, after the deluge, Hashem says to Noah, what does he say to him? He says to him, Kol remes, and this is in chapter 9, verse 3. Kol remes asher hu chai lachem yeh leochla ki yerek esev natati lachem et kol. So what is translated? And hold on. Every creeping thing that lives shall be food for you. As the green herb have I given you all things. So Rashi right there says in the spot, what is this trying to tell us? So Rashi says, I'll read it right in English immediately. For I did not permit Adam Harishon, says Rashi, to eat meat. So when Adam Harishon was in Garden Eden, he was vegan. He was not given permission to consume meat, okay? But green herbs alone, okay? So he was vegan. Adam Harishon and Adam and Eve were the first vegans. But to you, says Hashem says to Noah, even as the green herbs that I gave the full use of to Adam Rishon, do I give everything as well? Okay, and that's brought down in the Gemara as well. So we see there was this shift, and perhaps again, I'm only sort of, you know, giving my own 2 cents worth here. Perhaps this permission, so to speak, that Hashem gave to Noah had to do with the fact that, you know, the earth was really had very little vegetation yet you know, right after the flood, perhaps, and so there wasn't much else to eat apart from the animal life. I would suspect that might be one of the reasons why. But we see that there was this shift from the Garden of Eden to this time after the flood with Noah and the permission to consume meat. And now here we are. We're all trying to get back to the Garden of Eden, aren't we? We're all trying to get back to you know, the ideal life, the ideal living. And so the question now comes up, well, what about animal protein? Is it good? Is it not good? Animal-based foods, plant-based foods. Where am I today? Where do I fit in? Where does this all fit in today? Okay. So, of course, today we know that most proteins, both from plants and animals, are what are called complete proteins. What is a complete protein? That's the main thing in medicine you want to be worried, in nutrition you want to be worried about, is having complete protein. Complete protein means that you're basically is a protein that contains all the essential amino acids that we need for our functioning, for our body to function. Okay. Now, people today sometimes use the term low quality and a high quality protein, and they may mistakenly, I say that mistakenly for a reason, refer to low quality protein, you know, plant proteins being of lower quality because they typically have a lower proportion of these essential amino acids as compared to animal proteins. But at the same time, it's really important to understand that having a higher proportion of essential amino acids as animal protein does is actually damaging and not really an advantage to our health, okay? And I'm going to give you sort of a bunch of ways, 7 in particular, that animal protein damages our health. Okay, so first is the connection between animal protein and fiber. Well, the fact that really is that there is no connection. Unlike plant proteins come packaged with fiber, with antioxidants, with phytonutrients or vitamins. Animal protein comes with exactly none of them at all. Okay, so to this point, meat, eggs, poultry, dairy, fish, and other animal foods have absolutely no fiber whatsoever. Okay, keep that in mind. Many people, in their effort to get enough protein, quote unquote, get enough protein, they tend to eat large amounts of animal foods, and that displaces plant foods that have these important nutrients. So fiber deficiencies are very common in our society today. For example, the Institute of Functional Medicine recommends that men consume 38 grams of fiber, but the average adult only eats about 15 grams per day. So that's less than half of the recommended amount. Okay, according to this is again U.S. statistics, the USDA, Department of Agriculture, almost all Americans, so about 95%, do not get adequate amounts of dietary fiber. Okay, why is fiber so important? You might ask me. Oh, everyone talks about, oh, you gotta get fiber. You gotta have some fiber. Fiber is associated with a decreased risk of cancer, particularly colon and breast cancers, as well as a lower risk of ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, constipation, and diverticulitis. It may also reduce the risk of high cholesterol, heart disease, stroke. That's why fiber is so important. Okay. Now, animal proteins cause an increased risk for cancer. How does that occur? So when we ingest proteins that have a higher proportion of these essential amino acids, which basically is very characteristic of animal proteins, it results in our bodies producing higher levels of a hormone called insulin-like growth factor 1. So IGF-1, it's called. Okay. What does this hormone do? This hormone stimulates cell division and growth in both healthy and cancer cells. And for this reason, having higher circulating levels of IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor, that's been consistently associated with an increased risk for cancer, proliferation, and malignancy. Okay, that's the connection there. Now, another thing that's sort of it was in the news quite a bit a couple of years back, is that consuming animal proteins also results in the body producing higher levels of a chemical called trimethylamine N oxide, TMAO. Okay, TMAO, what does it do to the body? It's a substance that basically injures the lining of our vessels, creates inflammation, and it also facilitates the formation of cholesterol plaques, okay, in our blood vessels. And that, of course, is very bad for or problematic for cardiovascular health. TMAO is also created by very complex interactions between all the bacteria that we have in our digestion and our gut and the nutrients in the food we eat. So when we eat animal foods, that also changes the characteristics of the bacteria that live in our gut, in our digestion, in such a way that it also facilitates the creation of more TMAO. Okay, so consuming animal foods results in higher levels of this chemical in the body, which damages our vessels. And even without all the problematic aspects of animal foods itself, this one issue that involves this chemical called TMAO really is, according to major cardiologists, is sufficient for people to be very, very vigorously avoid animal foods as much as possible. Now, next thought here, next point. Animal protein contains high levels of a mineral called phosphorus. Okay, when we consume high amounts of phosphorus, one of the ways our bodies normalize the level of phosphorus is with a hormone called FGF23. That's fibroblast growth factor, FGF23. Now, the FGF23 has been found to be harmful to our blood vessels. It can also lead to hypertrophy of the muscle of the heart, the cardiac ventricle, and it's associated with heart attacks, with sudden deaths, and heart failure. So eating animal proteins with its high concentration of phosphorus can result in increased levels of this hormone in our bodies, again, being a problem for our health. Okay, so the next thing I get is, but I need iron. I'm iron deficient. I've got to have some more meat. I've got to have some more animal proteins. It's high in iron. How can I get my iron? Dr. Cohen, what do I do? So you're right. Iron is the most abundant metal in the human body, and we can consume it in two forms. First of all, as heme iron, which is found widely in the foods, animal foods like meat, poultry, and fish, or as what's called non-heme iron, which is found widely in plant foods. Okay, one of the problems with heme iron, which is the iron found in animal foods, okay, is that it can convert less reactive, what are called oxidants or chemicals, into highly reactive chemicals called free radicals in the body. Okay, and we know that free radicals can damage different cell structures like proteins, membranes, like DNA, which is the genetic structure of the body. Heme iron, so the animal-based iron, can also cause the formation of different compounds in our bodies called N-nitrosyl compounds. And these are carcinogenic. Okay, so it's not surprising that high intake of heme iron has also been associated with many kinds of gastrointestinal cancers. We also notice, nitrates, for example, there's a big connection between nitrates and gastrointestinal cancers as well. Now, it is true that heme iron from animal-based proteins, it has higher absorption rates and is more bioavailable. In other words, the body can use it better than non-heme iron. However, iron itself can cause what's called oxidative stress. It can rust the body basically and rust the DNA. Okay, so with iron generally, it's not always a situation where more is better. Okay, so at the same time, while we definitely need more iron, the absorption and bioavailability of iron from a well-rounded plant-based diet is generally enough, and we can avoid the problems that are associated with heme iron and other negative health attributes of animal foods. This is where I like to sort of tell people, and I sort of, I love to, sing the praises of juicing green vegetables and greens, kale, a lot of greens. I love juicing greens. I'm a big green juicer, and I find you can get, and especially if you're consuming the juice right after you've juiced it, you're getting all the main nutrients immediately with the enzymes, on site at point. And I think that for me, that's what I tell people, if you really want to get those minerals, get the juicing in there as much as you can, and then build upon that as well. Okay, now what about bone health and animal proteins? So animal proteins also have in general higher concentrations of what are called sulfur-containing amino acids. Okay, these are amino acids that have sulfur within them. Okay, and these sulfur-containing amino acids can induce a very subtle state of what's called acidosis when they get metabolized in the body, when they're processed in the body. Okay, and one of the mechanisms that our bodies use, that Hashem put in our bodies to use to deal with this or to compensate for this acidosis, is taking calcium from our bones to help neutralize this increased acidity in the body. Okay, and so over time, this can really, really harm the health of the bone, causing osteoporosis. Okay, and this is thought to be one of the reasons why some studies have found that populations that have higher dairy consumption as well as higher consumption of animal protein in general also have higher incidence of bone fractures. Okay, interesting connection. And finally, there's a connection between animal protein and cholesterol. Okay, most animal foods we know contain saturated fat and cholesterol. And it's true even for the so-called lean meats, whether it's chicken, turkey, salmon. Salmon happens to be one of the highest fatty fishes out there, actually. Okay, regardless of how they're cooked, or baked or broiled or steamed, doesn't matter. So as humans, we don't need to consume any cholesterol since our bodies synthesize all the cholesterol we need for all of our physiological functions. Okay, and eating cholesterol, despite this, is problematic for our health as it increases our risk of developing heart disease, which is obviously the number one cause of death for both men and women in the United States. Atherosclerosis, or basically the plaques of cholesterol that accumulate in the lining of the vessels. All right, and all of that is way less common on a plant-based vegan diet that's devoid of any animal products. Okay, and not only that, it's been shown by T. Colin Campbell, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, Dr. McDougall, what's the other one, and a bunch of other ones that basically they've been proven it actually in studies that eating a plant-based vegan diet that is very low in fat has actually reversed atherosclerosis. So something to keep in mind. So given all these issues, when we talk about, the high quality aspect of animal protein, it might be basically, you might say it's actually more high risk than actual high quality, I would say. So coming back to Stan's question, so now about Shabbat. So now I've learned all this. What do I do? How do I keep my Shabbat? So it really depends on you and how you want to go forward. In my for my personally, it's having health issues and understanding where animal proteins have an effect on my health. For me, keeping Shabbat involves eating healthier during Shabbat as well, but enjoying Shabbat as well and having extra things within the framework of what I can have. I'll say this before. I said this before. Other, many cultures who have longevity associated with them, they'll have meat, they'll have animal-based proteins, but it's in very small amounts. We're talking about like the size of, the palm size type of thing, and it's, on special occasions. So if that special occasion is once on Shabbat to enjoy that, that small piece of meat, and not the, 60-ounce, T-bone, whatever, tomahawk steak type of thing, then that's fine. You'll have your Shabbat, you'll enjoy that, and and if you're keeping that, keeping that at that level, I think you'll enjoy it, and Shabbat is there, for your enjoyment. I'll add, tzaddikim. There are many tzaddikim the Gemara talks about, and later literature talks about. Many of the righteous will only have meat on Shabbat and on holidays. They will never eat meat during the week. Never. They won't touch meat during the week at all, any animal proteins during the week. They'll have it only on Shabbat or special occasions, Seudot Mitzvah, for example, okay? And not only that, the Arizal talks about this idea of only those who really understand how to have proper kavanah when having meat, because if you really think about it, the consumption of meat is really one of the ways that we're able to raise up those sparks of Kedusha, those sparks of holiness, those lost souls, if you want to call it, reincarnated souls that are incarnated into animals, to raise them up directly from an animal to a higher level through brachot, through our consumption. That was one of the acts of a korban stand in the Beit HaMikdash. The animal would be slaughtered, and that would go directly from the lowest level to the highest level, all the way up, as far as being rectified in itself, as far as the tikkun that takes place, the rectification. So too, on the spiritual level, when we consume meats, we have to have that mindfulness. We're consuming this meat. This meat is special. If it's for Shabbat, it has additional kedusha, and we're able to sort of extract the sparks of holiness that are in it, and possible reincarnated souls, and bring them up through our brachot, through our birkat hamazon, and through the holiness of Shabbat. Bring them up to the level where we're bringing them back to where they're supposed to be. So that's also one of the ideas to have in mind. If and when you're going to consume meat, especially only on holy occasions of Shabbat.
So was there like the daily korban was an animal? So would they have been slaughtering animals every single day, and then there would be like a lot of meat? So that you'd think that they would be consuming meat during the week.
Very good. So bear in mind the Kohanim would consume the meat only within the confines of the Beit HaMikdash, and those also, and people who brought the korban that consume meat from would only consume them within the confines of Yerushalayim, for example, or that level. So you're still maintaining that mindfulness, that level of kedusha. It's not they didn't go shopping at the Beit HaMikdash and go home with the steaks to make on the grill when they got home. After their trek home, everything's been done with a certain mindfulness of kedusha, of holiness, of sort of rectifying these neshamot, or these sparks of holiness that are there. Bear that in mind. So yeah, you're right. So and that comes with it a certain kavanah, a certain intention, a certain focus, and a mindfulness. That's why it's done that way.
So there would be no waste.
Exactly.
Everything would be consumed, but it would be spread out between all the people. So
Right.
no one would be having excessive amounts.
And let me also, I will add, I think that if I recall correctly, there are anecdotal stories in the Gemara of Kohanim that would have, digestive issues, digestive problems. It was a known thing, to consume so much meat all the time, even though in general, Kohanim were on 2-week shifts on and off, but that amount of meat, those levels, there was, I remember seeing, learning instances in the Gemara where Kohanim had digestive issues because of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Just another question I had was regarding like fish. Because I read, there's a chemical called DHA, which is
Yes.
which
Yes.
is supposed to be very, very essential for your brain
Yes.
functioning and so on.
Essential fatty acids. Yep.
Yeah. So the sources for that I read was like from mainly from like fish oil, from anchovies mainly, and from herring and those kind of fish.
Yeah.
So if you're not having fish, if you're completely vegan, like how can you get how can you get those nutrients?
Excellent question. So you would be able to get those nutrients through basically it's an additional step process by consuming raw nuts and seeds, particularly
Mhm.
flax seeds, hemp seeds, chia seeds, and even on a certain level sesame seeds, the nuts, or you would consume those, and the body would convert them to the DHA and other Ron, you want to say something? Oh, sorry. Okay, you'll be able to convert them through that step if you're not directly consuming the DHA. Of course, if we're talking about some sort of a medically direct medical issue where essential fatty acids, if there's deficiency, I may prescribe or I will prescribe for temporary use, a fish-based oil, have it on a short term type of thing from reputable companies that are purifying it, and it's just pure fish, so essential fatty acids or DHA. But nonetheless, if a person doesn't require it for immediate need, they're able to obtain it through vegan sources or vegetable or nut sources, and the body synthesizes it basically.
So just one thing I've thought about. Okay, question is, if a Jew is not allowed to hunt, is a Jew allowed to fish?
Yes, because fishing is the shechita.
Because fish, I mean, that's the same.
Taking the fish out of the water is the act of slaughter.
Okay, so that's just by virtue of that
Yes.
But is that humane? Like, I mean, does the fish go through any kind of have they done any studies to show that the fish doesn't suffer?
I think there was something about the fish not feeling that there. I can't tell you offhand. Good question. How they'd be able to measure it, but good question. I don't know.
Two comments. Fish don't know about water. They never studied it. They don't find out until they're out of it that they were ever in it. They said, "Oh, that's interesting," So that's one thing. How would they know about water since it's ubiquitous? It's everywhere. The other thing is that I do know a little bit in Chinese medicine. I think maybe in Ayurvedic Indian medicine as well. That even when vegetarians are treated by healers, they may be prescribed meat therapeutically, like medically, as a medical kind of thing, and that it would be seen not as consuming that, but as using it like one might use any other medicine. Any comments or thoughts about that? I just know about that from the past. Yeah.
Definitely. There's an ancient midrash called Tana Develiao that writes that all the everything that was created on this earth, especially whether it's insects, whether it's animals, this all have sort of a therapeutic value, have a therapeutic indication of some sort. And yeah, I've never seen it more so than in traditional Chinese medicine, in Ayurvedic medicine, where every type of meat has a certain therapeutic indication, has a certain therapeutic characteristic. Some meats are quote unquote hotter, some are colder, so to speak, for the body, how the body reacts to them. And so, definitely. So for sure, again, we're talking about using food as medicine. There we go. And so here's an aspect where, in these traditional healing methods where food is used, exactly.
Let me propose a question then. If it were determined that somehow a type of meat substance that's clearly not kosher, can't be kosher, were to have important medicinal values, how do you imagine rabbis would consider that, and halakhically, if it would save lives?
So that question isn't so far-fetched. There were questions posed in previous generations, whether it was times of starvation or after the war, for example, even after World War II, after the Holocaust, where there were specific diets that were prescribed of non-kosher foods in order to rebuild people's systems. And these she'elas, these questions were posed to rabbis, and we're talking about pikuach nefesh. We're talking about saving a life here, which which basically is paramount. And so there were dispensations for certain cases, medically, that were given for the consumption of non-kosher substances. No doubt about it.
Thanks.
Do we know anything about the Rambam's diet? Like, did the Rambam eat meat?
A good question. I actually I have something on the Rambam's diet. He does talk about meat. He talks about it in small amounts. You know what? Let me do a little bit of reading on it, and I can sort of introduce it next week when we start to do the next class. It's a good idea.
Okay. Sounds very interesting. This is a very interesting topic.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to, in terms of, I was just looking up when you talk about fibers, like which are the foods which are considered to be like the best foods for fiber. This is like your green leafy vegetables and avocado, and then different kinds of seeds and nuts. Would those be the foods that you would say are the ones that are highest in fiber?
So I usually think of avocado as being more high in fat than in fiber, in general. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ron. And as well, nuts and seeds also more higher on the fat level. Fat thing. But definitely the green leafy vegetables, good fibrous vegetables as well, have a good amounts of fiber. The good, also grains as well are very high in fiber. Oats, spelt, rye, barley, wheat. Again, it depends on how you are affected by wheat. If those are a bit more harsh in their fibrous action on the body, I would say that the grains than the green leafy vegetables, but both are valid forms of fiber, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Psyllium seed husk, that's a big one.
Psyllium seed husk, it's a good fiber. And hemp and flax.
Chia seed and flax and chia.
Yeah. Okay, and some fruits, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Got fiber in it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's 7:59 here. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, guys?
No, but thank you. It's super interesting.
Thanks, Miri.
I'm trying, like we try to do a lot less meat. Like we're more flexitarian. Like I'll go weeks like without eating meat, and then it'll be like, oh, maybe we should. And it's kind of listening to you, there's not really much point in it. So
And I tell people first and foremost, listen to your body. Like, do trial on yourself. For example, get off meat for like, I don't know, 4 weeks, for example, if you can try it, and then try reintroducing it and see how you feel. See how you feel without it for 4 weeks, and then reintroduce it and see how you feel after having it, type of thing.
Yeah.
And really, really, learn to read your body and learn to listen to your body. It's very important.
Yeah. Done.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
late
Rabbi. Thank you so
Welcome.
much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Robert.
All
See you
right.
next week.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. See you next week.
Thanks. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Laila tov.
Bye, what?
Bye, Lito.